In professional game development, we have lots of people with specialised roles.
Now do you remember who you are? What you were meant to do?
It can be a bit of a minefield to an outsider.
Don't blame yourself. Blame me.
So if you've ever wondered who decides how much a game should cost, how long it should be, and who makes the tea,
My tea's gone. Who drank it? How am I supposed to have tea time without tea?
then you have come to the right place. Welcome to the Crunch Button. Yeah, that's right. Welcome back to the Crunch Button, where we pull back the digital curtain and talk about how games are made in professional development studios. My name is Nathan Baisley. I've been a producer and a game director for over 17 years in studios large and small, on console, handheld, arcade and mobile. And I'm going to be your host again today as we break down the roles and responsibilities in game teams. Now remember that this episode is part of a series of introduction episodes where we're dealing with high-level concepts and definitions. If you want to know more information, then comment and we'll deal with that in future deep dives or Q&As. Right, now let's get started with the high-level groups. The big two are developers and publishers, and they often get conflated online and people assign choices to the developers that were actually the publishers. Developers are responsible for making the game, and publishers broadly are responsible for the business side. So, if you're playing a game and you like the music and the graphics and the way that it feels, you can thank the developer. And if you like the price point and the platform that it's on, and maybe even the size of the game, then you can thank the publisher. Now, of course, having said that, it's more complex and interconnected than that. The publisher is generally the one taking the business risks. So for example, although the developer is the one deciding what goes into the game, the publisher will have an input on that, especially if they think that it is straying from what they believe the audience wants. In the last episode, we talked about getting a pitch approved, a project started. Once you go past that point, it's the responsibility of the publisher to take on all those business risks. Consequently, although it's the developer's choice about what goes into the game, the publisher is going to have something to say if they think that it's straying from what they believe that the audience wants. It is a close and essential relationship between the developer and the publisher that has a natural tension that in general benefits the player. Let's talk about some of the things that publishers are responsible for. They will do the advertising, they will write copy for articles, create box art for physical release. In the old days where we had manuals, they would do those too. And they'll create assets and be responsible for digital stores. The publisher will decide the price point and promotions once the game is live. And there's some things related to game development itself that the publisher often takes care of, such as localization, for example. And that localization can be game related as well as marketing related. Bear in mind that publishers are talking to counterparts in multiple different countries, all of which have their own local market needs. There are also some tasks that sometimes fall to developers, sometimes to publishers, and sometimes to the platform holders themselves, like arranging mock reviews, usability, and focus tests. So that's developers and publishers, but there are more groups that support the process. After publishers in the chain, we have platform holders such as PlayStation, Xbox, Meta, Nintendo. They are generally permissive in terms of what titles can be released on their platforms, but they do have quality expectations and standards. So what does that look like at the end of a project? It looks like publishers submitting the game for approval before it can be released on the platform. Now they aren't really checking if the game is fun. What they're doing is checking whether it's safe and suitable for their platform. They'll check things like, are we using the correct language to describe the buttons? And that the code hasn't introduced some kind of security problem for the hardware. After the platform, it's the retailer next in the chain, the last stop. So although the publisher will give a guide price for the game, the retailer are the ones that actually set it and do the price promotions. Now these days most retail stores are digital, but the same principle applies. At the other end of the chain, we have suppliers into the developers, starting with the engine. Now some game developers make their own game engine, however many more use third-party engines such as Unreal and Unity. These are more than passive suppliers to game development, they're partners who support game development with change requests and fixing bugs. Then there are other third-party groups also supporting the development team, such as external localization, external QA, third-party art houses, performance capture studios, and so on. Now, the thing that complicates this picture is that there are many single companies that do multiple of these functions in the process. PlayStation, for example, will be the retailer, the platform holder, the publisher, and the developer for their first-party titles. In fact, they also have their own external localization, external usability, external QA, which act as support functions to their development studios. So having talked about the groups, having talked about developers and publishers and so on, we're now going to zone in specifically on developers and talk about individual roles. Now, the important caveat off the bat is to say that it varies between studios. It varies most in terms of scale. Imagine one person in a very small team. They are going to be responsible for much more than that same individual in a much larger team. In larger teams, you get specialisms creeping in and people being responsible for very, very small parts of the game. It's the same workload, but the responsibility covers smaller or larger amounts of areas depending on how many people there are in that team. Remember, this podcast is about fundamentals and generalisms. So what we're going to talk about should apply to most studios, but I bet there's some that it doesn't. Off the bat, we're going to talk about design, code, and art. Between those three, you cover a lot of bases. The easiest one to explain is art, because if you're seeing it in the game, it's probably been made by an artist. And the art discipline splits down, as you can imagine, environment artists, prop artists, character artists, animators, visual effects, weather, sparks, explosions, breath, pizzazz. I bet I'm forgetting something. They're responsible for the way that the game looks. Think about your favourite game and imagine if you had to list all of the props in that game. It's going to be quite a big list. There'll be a lot of people in the art team who are making assets. Designers, first and foremost, are responsible for the way that the game plays, the way that it feels. They're the ones who are designing the experience. They're the ones that say, this is how far the characters should jump. This is what the inventory should look like. This is how things should unlock. So they are defining the game, but they're also implementing. So level design, for example, is one facet of design. So the level designer will literally be blocking out the path that the player will be taking. They'll block it out, they'll play it over and over and over and over, and when they're happy and they've tweaked it until they're satisfied, then they'll pass it over to artists to lock down. The gameplay designer will often be prototyping things until they've got the feel right, and then working with a programmer who will implement it in a way that is very efficient and works in the overall game. There is a lot of overlap between design and code, and it's slightly hard to articulate where the line stops. Programmers are really concerned with implementation of the ideas from the designers, exposing variables and things that the designers will need to tweak, and efficiency, security, making sure that the game is robust. If a game crashes, that will normally be the responsibility of a programmer rather than a designer. The design breaks down level design, gameplay design, system design, metagame design. If you've got a narrative, you'll have a narrative designer. Coders can sometimes be called programmers and sometimes called engineers. They're kind of interchangeable. Forgive me if I swap my terminology. They're sometimes called other things. No, that's a joke. I love coders. So the way I sort of see coders is there's some of them that are hardware facing and there are some that are player facing. We have programmers that are concerned with gameplay and there are programs that are concerned with systems. Imagine a designer has explained to you how the whole tapestry of the game is supposed to work. That as you make progress in this level, you are earning currency that can be used to spend on these unlock systems, but then there's other things that are unlocking based upon your progress. The programmer is trying to make sense of all of that in a holistic way and then implement it in a simple way, because when it's simple, it's efficient. Okay, code, design, art, who else have we got? Well, at the very top of the project, overseeing things and making sure that the project gets delivered are producers and often creative directors or game directors. So the producer is making sure that we are on track to deliver the whole thing. And that doesn't just mean cost and time. They're also making sure that all of our quality deliverables are being ticked off as well. The producer is the first contact, first point of contact for practically everybody. If you want to know how a project is doing, if you want a screenshot, if you want to offer a service to the team, you go to the producer. And the people within the team will also speak to the producer very often as a first port of call. The creative director, the game director, they'll be responsible for the vision. Like, what is it we're trying to make and why? Who is it for? How does it need to feel? Audio does so much work in terms of overall quality and feel of the game. Practically every animation is only half there until you hear the sound. Just play a game without audio and see how it feels, how different it feels. Now, typically the audio team will be working with design or for design. They're directed by design. How is this motion supposed to feel? This character is supposed to feel heavy. This character is supposed to feel strong. In this level, we want the player to feel scared. We want them to feel heroic. So all of those inputs are coming from design into the audio team. QA, where would we be without QA? QA is absolutely integral to the whole thing, and we're going to do an episode just on testing. QA play the game. They report back issues. They check when issues have been fixed. They are the eyes and ears of the team all the way through development, and they're absolutely crucial. Then we've got UI artists. So UI stands for user interface. I mean, the easiest thing to think about is the flow at the beginning. You switch the game on, you get a main menu, you press a button, then what happens? You get the next menu, press a button, then what happens? UI thinks about the entire flow through the experience. We go into a menu, that's UI. When there is a HUD, that's UI. Yeah, have I forgotten anything? In most departments, there will be a hierarchy, depending on the scale. You might have a lead, you might have seniors, you might have standard level and juniors. And depending on the scale, those teams then split down further. So, for example, you might have a lead designer, and underneath the lead designer, you might have a lead level designer and a lead system designer and a lead gameplay designer. Or if the team is smaller, maybe not. Then there's kind of studio level functions like technical directors, production directors, art directors. They tend to be concerned with supporting game teams if you've got multiple game teams, and if you've got a house style, if there's tools that you want the whole studio to be using, they look after that. And of course, it's a business. So you have all the support functions that you would have in any normal business, like HR and finance and so on and so forth. Okay, phew, bit of a whistle stop there. Lots of information. As always, if there are questions, please put them in the comments. We're going to do deeper dives in the future. If there's anything you think I missed, let me know. If I've worked with you before and I forgot to mention your role, I'm sorry. Thanks so much again. I hope that was useful, and we'll see you all soon for the next show.